Earlier this month, LEGO finally released the X-Men Mansion, featuring 10 minifigures and a total of 3,093 pieces, at a price of $330. It has a great Sentinel build and new exclusive figures like Gambit and Bishop. Unfortunately, I can't afford it, but to be honest, although the mansion looks great, the figures are actually really disappointing. Most of these characters would really benefit from dual molded parts and better prints. The selection of characters is also underwhelming, since most are repeats, and we're still missing essential X-Men characters. So I've taken it upon myself to not only improve on some of these figures, but make some characters this set is missing. Without further ado, let's go. The first figure I decided to tackle was Colossus. I found a silver figure for the base. I had to sand down pretty much all of the parts so that the paint stays on. But don't worry, they're all knockoff parts. After a coat of silver paint, this is the result. So now, we can start to paint the red draws, boots, gauntlets, and finally, we can start on the torso. I had some trouble with the face, but this is the best I could do. After adding the hair, this is the final result. Colossus may not be a fan favorite, but he definitely deserves to be included in some sets, especially with this being the potential. Up next is Cable. I used a white version of the Superman hair and the Winter Soldier's metal arm. First step was removing the star printed on the robotic arm. The head I used is unfortunately damaged, but I think kind of gives it a bit of a battle-damaged look. So after masking the legs and torso, we are ready to paint. Final step was adding the straps and buckles to his suit. And this is the final result. I don't usually like stud shooters, but Cable tends to wield giant, oversized guns. So I think this one works perfectly. Bishop is actually one of the characters exclusive to the X-Men Mansion, but in my opinion, could be greatly improved. I started by adding a goatee to this face, and after my poor attempt, and didn't even want to try to add the M scar. Using a rubber tube, I made some wrist cuffs to add on the hands. I also added some masking tape so that I can paint the blue sleeves. I also cut a yellow stripe to add for extra texture on the sleeve. After finishing both, we can paint the black boots. I also decided to make him his iconic red bandana as a separate attachment. While I let that dry, continued to work on his suit design. I added a yellow stripe and cut at the appropriate spots. I really wanted to add Bishop's X emblem on the belt, but it would have been misaligned. So I had to improvise and added a circular bit on the belt. This is the final result. Although the belt was a hassle, I think it was worth it in the end. I also went ahead and made him a custom gun. I based this figure off of his X-Men 97 show appearance, which I think is spot on. Speaking of X-Men 97, a character that also made an appearance in that show was Forge, so that's who I worked on next. I attempted to draw a mustache on a clone face from Star Wars, then I cut a red stripe to make his bandana and add it to his hairpiece. I went ahead and decaled the torso, the arms, hips and legs. And now we can paint the blue in his costume. Forge actually has a mechanical leg, so I decided to use this robotic leg found in the LEGO Monster Fighter Wave. I changed the hairpiece last minute as I found one that is more accurate, which I think really saved this figure. Otherwise, I don't think he would have looked much like the character. I also added a satchel to represent the pouches that hang across his chest, most likely carrying tools for his inventions. Next up, Nightcrawler. It was really disappointing to see that they didn't include this figure as part of the set. For this character, I decided to do something a little bit different. I sketched up a separate neck attachment that will extend down to the hips. After cutting it out, we can paint it red. While I let that dry, I decided to work on the face. This took several attempts to get right, but I'm happy with the result. After placing decals on the arms and legs, I painted the red highlights. The final step is adding a tail. An easy way would be to find one from the Avatar sets, but I unfortunately don't have any. So I once again had to improvise something. Here is the final reveal. I gave him one of the blades that he often wields. Outside from the tail, I think he turned out pretty great. It was really crucial to me that I do this character justice, as he is my second favorite X-Men. At the end, I'm really happy with the result. Another character I'm sure a lot of people were really hoping to return is Deadpool. Fortunately, I have the luck to own from his original appearance way back in the day. I made a few customizations and restorations to him, since my childhood self truly wore out the printing. But in order for him to not be alone, I decided to make his reluctant partner, Domino. I sketched out her design on the decals I applied with masking tape. After that, she's simply ready to paint. I based her look off of her comic book appearance since I had the perfect headpiece for her. She's wielding some dual pistols from Star Wars. This design could probably be easily replicated by using Black Widow pieces, if you decide to go in a purist route. Next on the list is Jean Grey. Instead of doing her X-Men suit though, I went with her Phoenix design instead. LEGO actually officially released this figure, but resellers have set the price to upwards of $1,000. Sounds insane. But by using dual molded parts and designing our own torso, we can easily replicate and improve upon this character. I used clear tape in order to not have color match, then with dark green painted the details. I cut and applied a yellow stripe for her belt. I also made the stripes that hang off separately and applied them on top. Final step was painting the logo. And now I have a figure that's worth $1,000. Apparently, I did end up painting the hair red, just to be a little more accurate to her appearance in the comics. She's actually a perfect example of how it's possible to recreate ridiculously expensive figures all on your own, and still remaining partially purist. Probably one of the toughest characters to make in this showcase was Rogue. First thing to tackle had to be her jacket. After designing it and cutting it out, I began the painting process. This was going to take several layers. So again, while that dries, I made some progress on the legs. What I did was take a yellow stripe and align it along the middle of the hips and part of the legs. Then I cut the sections which allow for articulation. After I achieved the desired look, I went ahead and put on her boots. The hardest elements were definitely the jacket and legs, as I had to do some unorthodox decal application to ensure I nail the design. But after all of that, I added the X emblem on her right arm, as well as her belt that hangs sideways. I also added her headband and painted the white on her hair. She was also based on her comic book appearance, hence the brown jacket. After having such a tough time, it's time for an easy upgrade. Beast was also mysteriously excluded, even though his lab is present in the mansion. We did see him in the CMF series, so by creating a coat and adding some white arms, we can replicate his laboratory. Fortunately, the head has double-sided printing that depicts Beast wearing his glasses. I also made a vial as an accessory for him to hold. If you have the Beast figure, I suggest trying out this simple but effective upgrade. A relatively obscure character I decided to include is Warpath. He's not very popular, but I was definitely fascinated with his appearance in the Days of Future Past movie. Using a Batman torso, we can easily replicate his look. He already has the muscles and yellow belt printed, so now we add the red stripes. I added the sleeves and painted them black, added some cuffs on the wrists, then started painting his mask. This is the final result. Warpath's abilities include enhanced senses, superhuman speed, and regeneration. Very similar to Wolverine, so I can see why he's not mentioned very often. My least favorite X-Men is Jubilee, but I had to include her since LEGO refused. She was actually quite simple. All I had to do was decal the legs to depict her shorts. Made her a jacket, colored it yellow, and here she is. There's actually a decent hairpiece that can be used from the Hidden Side theme. It's from Sort of Evil Scientist. By repainting that piece to the appropriate colors, you can achieve a pretty decent Jubilee. But since I don't own that piece, I had to add the glasses on her forehead. Moving on to my absolute favorite X-Men, Cyclops. LEGO gave us a pretty good rendition, but can still be greatly improved. I began by placing clear tape again in order to paint on the muscles. After that is done drying, I applied the yellow straps along his suit, then placed a circle in order to paint the X emblem later. Next was painting the belt piece. By using some hollow studs, I made the yellow cuffs for the wrists. After making and applying the elements needed for the head, all that there is left to do is paint the details. And here we have it, the leader of the X-Men. I'm more than happy with how he turned out, although I wish I could have made the flesh tone on the face a bit brighter. I also excluded the draws because otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to fit the straps along the legs. A figure that LEGO actually portrayed quite well is Storm. I just don't have the luck to own that figure, so I made my own. I recreated the fancy cape she has out of paper, repainted a hairpiece I had into white. After adding the decal on the torso, all that there is left to do is add the muscles, draw the belt, then painting them gold. And here is how she turned out. She's pretty simple in design, but I think turned out really clean. I would have tried to add the lightning in her eyes, but I know it'll be really difficult and won't turn out great. Also took some creative liberties by adding only one X logo just because I didn't want to cover the gold on the other side. With the parts I have, I made my own version of Iceman. I attempted to recreate the face print that the original has as close as possible. The torso and legs come from an old Electro figure that work pretty well. I gave him the coffee mug as a funny accessory. We're nearing the end of this showcase with Emma Frost. The only thing I had to do for her was add some boots and paint the draws. I used a chest piece from the Indiana Jones that works pretty great. The hairpiece probably comes from the Friends theme or something similar. I gave her a diamond as an accessory as a reference to her mutant ability. Last, but certainly not least, I know many have been waiting long for this. Gambit. By far the hardest part of this figure was color. Matching trench coat to the official dark tan. I still wasn't able to match it all that well, but got relatively close. The boots and the chest printing were achieved by using decals, and the face is actually a bootleg that I found in my collection that works almost perfectly. All it needed is the glowing eyes. We recently got this cool magic effect in the D-end CMF that also works perfectly to represent Gambit's kinetic blasts. That's the end of this showcase. These figures certainly took a lot of time to create, but I think we're worth it in the end. Let me know which figure was your favorite in the comments below, and what are your thoughts on the new X-Men mansion? Was it overhyped? As an X-Men fan, and say without a doubt that it still left a lot to be desired. But anyway, bye for now.